Okay, you're unmuted and you're live.
Awesome.
So, yeah, okay.
All right, well, that clock up there says it's 4 o'clock. I don't know if we're waiting on anybody else or they're still here. Okay, I will go ahead and call this Carbon County School District 2 Board of Trustees work session to order. Obviously, the main topic that we called this for was to discuss reopening plans for fall. I see Amanda Brown is on from Carbon County Health Department. She's the only one that's on right now. So let's go ahead with the Pledge of Allegiance. Paul, if you want to start.
No, Henry, can wait back here?
Yeah.
I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, item 2.
Mr. Chair, I move that we approve the work session agenda as presented.
Second.
All right, it has been moved and seconded that we approve the work session agenda. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay. All right, item 3. I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Copeland, if you want to go through questions or presentations or however you handle it.
All right. Amanda, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Thank you for joining with us. We just are trying to get our heads wrapped around some reopening plans to begin to plan a little bit for next fall. So we did come up with some questions and I sent them to you. We may have some others come up as we talk a little bit about this. So I was just thinking we could kind of go down those question lists, and then the last one actually has to do about kind of where we started with our tiered approach framework ideas. So we'll just start with number 1, and that was actually for me. I've been in several meetings with other superintendents and ADs across the state with Ron Laird, who's the executive director of WASA, and basically his instruction or direction for us is that we need to work with our county health departments to determine some of the things that we can plan for, and some maybe it's a little early to, but I just wanted to kind of get your thoughts on your ideas, since we're working with each county health officer and health department. And I know, a lot of things could happen between now and August, but we do have, our schedules already planned, and he was saying that it would be up to county health officers maybe to whether you allow out of state, or you would allow us to go out of state, or in certain counties where maybe risks are higher or things like that. And one of the examples he gave was the Uintah County Health Officer has instructed the 3 Uintah County high schools, which is Mountain View, Lyman, and Evanston, to not plan any trips into Utah for their schedules. And so they were trying to kind of see what they could do. So anyway, I just wanted to know some of your thoughts at present, even though I know that I'm not asking a commitment or an actual necessarily, rule right now, but how do you see it? How does our Carbon County Health Department see their role and how we can work together, and at what point we need to sit down and have a serious discussion and actually look at schedules of our 3 high schools for the fall activities?
Yes, thank you. I thank you for inviting me to the meeting today. I will try to answer your questions the best I can. Dr. Couch wasn't able to join us today, so there might be a few questions I can't answer on his behalf, but I will try my best. And if there's specific questions to him, I can always talk to him at a later date and get back to you guys. As far as the sports, that is something that me and Dr. Couch have briefly talked about, but I think there's a lot of factors that we'll have to think about at the time. So I know sports start fairly early but there's, our situations in the county is ever changing. This week may be different from next week, but I think in general, we can come up with some guidance that we can use kind of regardless of the situation, or it might depend also on what the sport is, where the traveling is, what county in Wyoming or out of state. There's a lot of factors there. So where you're going, how many people, what all that looks like might be a case by case kind of basis. I don't think we can create too vague of guidance because things are changing so often in the entire state. So for example, if we were, traveling to a different county that had one active case versus a county that had 50 active cases would be very different. So that's something that we'd have to take into account as we kind of look at the sports and the activities and what that looks like. I don't have a for sure answer for you right now, but I also know that there are a lot of people at the state level that are also having these conversations. And I'm hoping that we can get some more guidance from them too, to kind of help us as we plan more activity things with our school districts.
Have y'all talked at all yet with Carbon One? I know we met a couple of times back a few months ago when the whole closure started, and has that conversation begun with them, or are they kind of like us, just beginning to kind of try to figure out?
Yes. So we have had a few meetings with them. They've created like a local committee that is kind of coming together. I think we're meeting weekly at this point, and we're kind of coming up with a little bit of having those initial conversations of things to consider. And also the state also has a committee right now that has a lot of different people, representatives from across the state, and they're trying to establish like a template that will be sent down to us as health departments and then local school districts, and we can kind of use that template to plug what applies to each individual school district. So I'm not actually on that committee myself, but I have talked to a lot of members on that. And my understanding is that what this template will look like is there's pretty much going to be 3 tiers. So tier 1 would be like 100% distance learning. Tier 2 would be some hybrid, and there may be sub tiers in tier 2 of some combination of distance learning and in-person learning, which is kind of where we're at right now. Tier 3 would be 100% in-person learning. So that's kind of the 3 categories that they have put out there as where we can kind of stick things in. And then each one of those tiers, there was like 6 or so categories of things to consider within that. So health and safety, instruction, nutrition, activities, communication. There was a few more. I don't actually have the document in front of me, but things to consider within each tier. And then within each one of those categories, they look at what is the school district going to require, what is going to be recommended, and what is things to consider. So that's the template that the state is working on, that I think we would be beneficial to kind of follow that same template, because the information is going to be coming down from the state in that template. So that might kind of help us get a little bit head start on that. So we're working through that with school district 1. We haven't made it. I think we've worked through tier 1 and then part of tier 2. So there's a lot of information that I think might be relevant, or things I can bring back to you guys that of things that we've discussed over there. But I know each school district is independent and has their own things to consider and their own kind of priorities as well. So just some ideas that we can throw out there. And I think that it will be good to kind of plan for each one of those tiers, even though it looks like we're kind of in tier 2 right now. We don't know what the fall is going to bring. If we end up getting a surge or a lot of cases, we might have to go back to tier 1. We might, go on to tier 3. We really don't know, but it would be good to kind of have options and things thought about now and early, so we can kind of move throughout those tiers more fluidly.
Yeah, thanks for that, Amanda. We have been told as superintendents that template will probably, well, their goal is to have it available by around the first week of August or so, maybe the end of the first week, out to school districts. And so, yeah, we're looking for that also. And, you know, our whole framework that we have, the red, yellow, green, you know, it kind of is based on a tiered approach, which, you know, maybe we could talk about toward the end of these questions. But, and some of these questions that are still under question 1 actually is loaded with a lot of questions that have to do with activities like fans being able to come. And do you see this as being something that can be discussed and somewhat planning done in, you know, by the 1st of August, or are you seeing this as a week-to-week progression? I guess I'm struggling a little bit with, you know, we have a schedule and yet we don't have a schedule, I guess, until, you know, we know what's going to happen. So it is challenging for all of us. I know health department folks too. So I guess any comments on that? And the final question there: who will have the final authority to make these kinds of decisions? Will it be the health department? Will it be the board and administration? Will it be a combination of both? I mean, I guess I'm trying to picture how this process is going to work moving forward.
Sure. I definitely think that we could have some more conversations about specific things related to the activities and have a game plan before August. I think that within that game plan, there may be things that we can take into account, like plan for multiple scenarios almost within that plan. So we can kind of have an idea of what it will look like. And I think a lot of these questions will be answered based on the state health orders. So if we have specific, we can only have groups of so many or things like that, that will kind of help guide. Ultimately, I do believe that the county health officer does have the authority to say yes or no, but he hasn't really been one to want to make that sole decision. So he wants to work with the school districts, with the state, with all of the different people that need to be at the table to make this decision together, instead of just saying this is how it's going to be. Ultimately, I think it is the state health officer, and that authority comes down to the county health officer to make decisions. But like I said, he would want to have those conversations with you and try to work out a best, the best we can anyways for the situation to see what's going to work.
Okay. And then my last question on this one before we go to number 2, the out-of-state thing, because I know Ron Laird mentioned that the out-of-state, that one scenario would be that no out-of-state. So we don't have a lot of out-of-state competitions, but we do have some in our schedule that we typically go to. And then we have one special situation where our Hannah girls volleyball team have been raising money to go to a kind of a national tournament in Florida in September, I believe. And I guess we're trying to consider all of the things and figure that out. And I'm not expecting you to give an answer like right now, but I just wanted to throw that out so you would have that knowledge and at some point, we're going to have, we're going to need some guidance on those kinds of things.
Sure, absolutely. I definitely think there's a lot of things to take into account when we're looking at that. So when, of course, would be, so September, the situation may look very different than March or May next spring. So I think a lot of things that we'll have to kind of look at: where in Florida they're going, how many people, how they're going to get there, a lot of different things. And the stance that we've kind of taken at the health department is we're trying to find ways to do all these little things. We don't want to just say no to everything. There's got to be a way we can figure it out. So that with modifications or different things, there's always going to be a risk there, but how do we do everything that we can to minimize that risk and still be able to do what we need to do and let these kids still have some sort of a normal experience, So it's a combination between, trying to find the healthiest, best way to do these things instead of just saying, no, you can't do anything. So we'll have to kind of take a lot of those things into account when and I don't want to say it's going to be like a case by case, but with big things like this, there's a lot of independent questions that we'll need to ask. So I think we could just set up a time to meet and kind of get more details on those. And then we should be able to say, okay, well, if this is the situation, you know, we could do this, 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 and then we could work that out together.
Okay, and our timeline, really, because we didn't want to spend just an intensive amount of time until we got the state template, we kind of came up with our general, what we call a framework of a tiered approach, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. But, you know, we were thinking that once we get the template, which would probably, is probably going to realistically be maybe right after the 4th of July, to really sit down and work out details, and maybe we can set up some meetings then, even if it's Zoom or whatever, with some of us, and that's just kind of the framework, time framework we're looking at. So just for your information.
Yeah, sounds good. I will definitely be involved as much as you guys want us to, and we can work through those conversations. I am definitely hoping that this template is pretty helpful. And also, I can also talk, my supervisor at the public health level is on this committee as well. So I can try to get some more information, hopefully, from that point of view. But definitely, I would like to work through all of those. Just, you know, send me invites. Zoom would probably work better. And then Dr. Couch said he would join whatever he's available to. If there's specific questions for him, he can join as well.
Okay. Yeah, and thanks for your help in the past with our plans and so on too. Anybody else have anything related to question 1 before we go down the list? And again, we realize you don't have all the specific answers. These are just some of the questions that we have formed in our minds that I'm sure you have discussed with Dr. Couch and the other folks even around the state. Number 2, basically just, so I know Dr. Couch was pretty adamant about it when we were talking about allowing seniors in small groups back in a couple of months ago toward the end, and then through the end of the year, about underlying, you know, the serious underlying health conditions that were listed, you know, the list that I think we received from you, if I'm not mistaken, or from maybe the state. But do you see, and again, this could be a question you're just going to have to pass on to Dr. Couch, but we do have students with some fairly serious underlying health conditions. Do you foresee a situation, especially if things continue to relax a bit, and according to governor's orders, where, you know, parents and or their health providers signing waivers that they could be allowed to return to school? And again, that's a question that some of the admin have, I think, here. So
yeah, we have talked about creating like attestation statements for staff and students, because we would want to kind of, there's multi reasons for that, I guess. For one, being liability, because, you know, my opinion, in a few months, I think once this all COVID is up, I think there's going to be a lot of personal injury lawyers that are going to try to get everything that they can from people because, oh, so-and-so got me sick, whatever. So it's a liability and a protection for you, but it's also through signing a waiver, that's a chance for us to educate and say, okay, if you're signing this waiver, this is the things you need to understand. And so it gives us an opportunity to explain all those risk factors. Okay, if your student has type 1 diabetes, for example, or something like that, and they're being exposed, these are the things that we need you to consider and make sure that they understand the risk versus benefit of that. So I definitely think that that could be something that we'd recommend. I wouldn't recommend all students signing that. I would specifically for those ones that we know are underlying health conditions, but that doesn't necessarily waive the liability of, you know, if somebody doesn't have an underlying health condition and something were to happen. You know, unfortunately with COVID, some people have lasting effects from this that had no pre-existing condition, and that's just unfortunate, but it happens. So I would say for students and for staff, that would be a good idea if they have a known underlying condition, that they talk about it with their doctor, make sure that their doctor understands the risks and the benefits, and then have them sign that statement.
okay. And anybody can jump in with questions. I'm just kind of going down the list. Third question, since the risk of COVID for children appear to be quite low, would it be better to focus on promoting exercise, healthy diets, and good mental health and instituting restrictions, several of which are negative to exercise and mental health? So just what are your thoughts on that question?
Sure. Yeah, it is a fine balance between trying to keep people health and safety into account, along with trying to promote all those normal things that, the mental health, and most important, we've been talking about a lot. I wouldn't say focusing on those things is more important than the restrictions. I think it is a balanced approach that we have to take into account all of these different things. So with restrictions, how do we still keep these kids healthy? There's no black and white answer to that. And I think it depends on a lot of different factors. And there's, health equity kind of comes into play with that as well. Do people have access to resources with restrictions in place? A lot of things. But focusing on healthy diets and exercise is not going to protect these kids from COVID. So we still have to protect, and their health and safety is the number one priority. Yes, their mental health is just as important, and healthy diets and exercise, but our goal right now is to prevent them from getting COVID or the lasting effects of that. So we have to prioritize, and unfortunately that makes it hard because mental health is being affected by that. But it's not necessarily something that we can just say, sorry, we're going to take down restrictions because it's affecting that. Like, it's a balanced approach.
Okay. All right, I'll just keep going. Many parents have returned to allowing children to fully engage with their friends. In reality, that will likely continue to happen outside of school. Some parents are probably still restrictive. Restrictions are likely to be strongly opposed by the former and supported by the latter. How do you square that? I mean, I don't know that there's a definite answer. I guess that's just kind of a reality that touches a little bit on what you've already talked about.
Yeah, unfortunately, people are going to do what they want to do. And even with our recommendations and our trying to educate people as much as possible, different families have different views of this whole thing, and we're not going to be able to change that. So all we can do is educate and recommend. And unfortunately, we cannot, like, as public health, we can't police people. If it comes down to somebody actually breaking a public health order, the county health officer and the county attorney would be involved in there, maybe fines and things like that involved. But at this point, we have a lot of people doing the tattletale thing, and unfortunately, all we can do is educate. Yes, absolutely, you can go play with your friends, but you need to understand what that risk looks like. For example, our last case investigation had to do with some teenagers, and a lot of them were not practicing social distancing, and that they, got a kind of a awakening of what that looks like when trying to do a case investigation. Oh, well, I was on so-and-so's house and us four were over here for this weekend, and all of these different things, and makes contact tracing a little bit harder. But unfortunately, people are going to still do it, and there's not much we can do about that.
And you touched a little on this, but this kind of number 5 kind of gets into, so like when we talk in July and we come up with maybe some plans for the High School Activities Association, I know it's all kind of connected, or whatever plan we come up with. Let's say we have our framework, or we look at the state template, and then we kind of mesh what we've done in with that and expand a little bit and go into detail. When we send stuff to the county health department, to you, Dr. Couch, and you always also include Jackie, is everything that you look at as a county forwarded to the state health department? Or I guess I'm trying to figure out how that relationship works.
Sure. Most things are, especially school district plans, all of our variances. So if anybody files an application for an independent variance, whether it's a business or an event, or like all the stuff with like summer events and stuff like that, all of those have to be forwarded on to the state health officer. Little things, the county health officer has the authority to kind of decide, but most of it's like a plan, like the reentry plan or things like that, do have to be approved by the state health officer. So the way that the authority kind of falls down is the state health officer has the ultimate authority. She by law can pass that authority down to the county health officer. So he can't necessarily do anything independent of the state health officer. But so everything's kind of a fluid conversation. So there's things that county health officers can do that they've kind of discussed, or there's certain things that they have meetings every so often. They talk about, okay, well, what is your opinion on this or whatever. And they can make those little decisions, but and he, excuse me, he has his recommendations that he can do at any time without, that's kind of aside from the state health officer. But when it comes to actual authority, it would all come from the state health officer.
Okay, and kind of as an extension of that question then, because I just saw this and I'm just curious about it. So the governor has given the orders. Is that based, so is the line of authority the governor, or does he get his authority from the state health officer? I mean, I guess I'm trying to figure out that whole relationship. I'm just curious.
It's a little confusing. My understanding is that the authority comes from the state health officer to do the public health orders, but it's a partnership between them both. So I honestly don't know how to answer that question, because I'm not sure who has like how the hierarchy is. But I know that the actual public health orders come from the state health officer's office with kind of support and guidance from the governor. So I think it's a joint effect at that top level, but who actually has more authority, I'm not sure.
Okay. So number 6 is kind of a hypothetical. Oh, go ahead.
We skipped over the second half of number 5. We kind of touched on it before, but so that was about state health. And then, so COVID is one risk that's out there. How is that balanced with the other risks? It seems like that's all that's talked about. So how do you balance it with those other risks or home situations that are in that question, or other, being restricted, not coming to school? How is COVID balanced, I guess, with other risks, or is it?
We try our best as far as our recommendations to take those things into account. And it is a hard balance because all those other things doesn't go away because of COVID. We still have a lot of things that are still going on in the background that we have to take into account. But ultimately, like I said before, health and safety and life is our number one priority. So if we have to make that decision, do we send somebody home? Like, for example, if they're, somebody's ordered isolation or something, we would have to consider, okay, if it's a child or an adult, what does their home life look like? What does their work life look like? Do they have access to food? Do they have, everything that they need to sustain that isolation, things like that? That is part of our investigation. And we try to connect those services to the people that need it. But ultimately, we have to follow guidance from the state that says these people have to isolate, things like that. The public health orders, the state took a lot of those things into account when creating these orders, but they kind of, those orders have a certain purpose, and sometimes it affects mental stress or whether people have access to food and things like that, that we kind of have to deal with those consequences at the local level. But we can't not have public health orders because of those consequences, if that makes sense. So it is a balance for multiple levels. So we try to balance that at the local level. The state's trying to balance that for the whole state at their level. And there's no perfect black and white of how to make these decisions. And different counties have different opinions about how to make these decisions, which makes it really hard for us to manage when a neighboring county is doing something very different than us. But honestly, we're just trying to do the best in the situation that we have. Like COVID is something new we've never faced before. We have plans for these things, but our plans have kind of been thrown out the window because COVID has been so unique. And so we do take all of those things into account, but it's just a balance, and it's kind of a case by case thing. We have set guidelines that we follow for certain things, and other times we just have to make a decision in that moment. So I don't know if that answered the question very well, but there is a balance and it is very hard to achieve.
Any other questions? All right, number 6, who do you believe are more at risk for COVID when schools reopen, staff or students, or are the risks equal? And I know that I'm just asking your opinion, I suppose, because there are concerns also about staff. We talk about our students, of course, but we have a lot of staff too that are affected by all of this. So.
Yeah, I'd say that question is hard to answer. I think there are some individuals, regardless of age, that are more at risk for complications from COVID, or more at risk of getting COVID. So I wouldn't say a specific staff or students are more at risk. I think it really depends on the individual. So there's some people that are more at risk depending on what your workforce looks like. If you have a lot of older adults, then I would say maybe those guys are a little bit more at risk. But I would say that each individual kind of has their own risks. So there's some kids, like in general, most kids don't have a whole lot of heart disease, diabetes, those type of things that puts adults more at risk. But we are seeing now that there are a little bit more complications when kids get COVID. So we're kind of always learning about COVID, and with that, the risks kind of change. So in general, I would say older adults or people with pre-existing conditions are going to be your high risk group.
And what is the infection rate for Carbon County under 18? Do we have numbers on that?
I do not have that in front of me right now. I could pull that data and get back to you though.
Okay, thanks.
And I think on the state health, and I'll share that here after a little bit, but there is on the state health website, there is a lot of county data on there. So I'll show you what that is a little bit later.
Yeah, and if you also go to the Homeland Security website, there's a lot of really great data for Wyoming on that website as well.
Department of Homeland Security?
Yes.
Okay. The next question is kind of in a different direction. So one of the challenges I think of schools and talking with other superintendents are bus routes and team travel, where you've got groups of kids on a bus. And I guess this may have to do with a little bit about spacing in general. Do you see that the 6-foot spacing is going to continue moving forward, or would that be reduced? And the way that specifically probably affects transportation as much as anything is just because obviously a bus is a certain size, and there's no way to get 6-foot spacing if unless you're just going to take 8 kids, which is not real practical. So have y'all had any conversations about how transportation will be dealt with?
Yeah, we've had a few conversations about this, and to answer the first question, I definitely think that the social distancing, the 6 feet, I think that is probably going to be the last restriction to leave us. I think even when everything else, all the other restrictions are lifted, I think that one will be still in place. And as far as buses, I know it creates a unique situation. Some of the other school districts that I've talked to in School District 1, we've talked about having some kind of communication with the parents. So if a parent is available and able to take their student to and from, activities, school, whatever it may be, that needs to be the first option. I know that's not always an option, but that would help decrease the amount of students that you have to transport. And then how to space those students on the bus. It creates a unique challenge that we have not really found a solution or heard a good solution to yet. But I think that is still going to be highly recommended. How we end up doing that, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know how it's a little bit hard to solve if you take a team with the distances we travel in Wyoming anyway. spacing. But-
Yeah, so I am hoping to get a little bit more guidance from the state when we get this template from them. So that question has been pushed up. And nobody's really come up with a good solution for that yet.
Yeah. All right, the next question, and then just bullet points kind of along with that. I think I sent a copy of just what we've done so far, which is just kind of a basic framework where we discussed what these tiered levels maybe would look like. So I guess, number one, you already mentioned that you think that, and this is what I've heard, is why we've gone with the tiered approaches, because that's what we're hearing the state template is going to really be, is kind of a tiered approach where, depending on what's happening in your communities and our county, will depend on kind of what level you flow into and out of, and it can go, different ways. We put, so we just made ours red, green, and yellow, or red, I guess I should say that, or green, yellow, red, and then black would just be if something closes. Do you see, is this a good start on an approach? I know we've got details to kind of flesh out as we talk about these questions, but do you feel like we're on something similar to what you're hearing as far as our beginning approach?
Yeah, so I just pulled that up and looked at it again. So just a few comments. I guess the tiered approach, we foresee it kind of being more of what's going on at the community level, and then moving between those tiers based on that. And so we would do all of Carbon County, which creates a unique kind of scenario because of the two school districts may be in different conditions, but we are tracking data for all of Carbon County. And the way that you have it where it says schools open, no known cases among staff or students, I would focus more on maybe active cases or how many active cases we have in the community versus how many you have in the school, because that changes things a little bit. So we are at a community spread level in Carbon County. So the last several cases that we've identified, we could not find a source from. So we don't know where these people are getting sick. And we suspect there's asymptomatic people spreading the illness in the community that we are not aware of. So there's a lot of different factors. So just moving between the tiers, I think, needs to be a bigger picture of the community instead of just looking at cases among staff and students, because the staff and students don't just stay at school, they're in the community. So we need to look at this a little bit bigger than just what's going on within the school. Yeah, go ahead.
Just as a question, so are you indicating that whatever is happening in Carbon County, that all schools will be under the same situation? So, because we were thinking that, even within our district, we have separate communities that some are fairly distant. So I guess I'm trying to hear what you're saying. Are you saying that when we say community, we're not talking Saratoga or Encampment or Hannah, we're talking Carbon County?
Ideally, yes. So that is how we track all of our data. We, of course, know exactly where all of these cases are, but we haven't really put that out to the community because of the uniqueness of Carbon County. When it comes down to moving between tiers, I think that's a conversation that we can work between, like you and me and the health department of what's actually going on within school district 2 versus school district 1, but that's not something that we can really share with the community, because with Carbon County and the nature of our small communities, if we release that information of, oh, well, we have 2 cases in this area and we have 1 case over here, people are going to figure out who those cases are. And that is, we have to abide by those HIPAA laws. So we've chosen to share all of the data countywide. But I think in closed conversations, we can let each school district know what that looks like independently from the other data that so I think it's both, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. So we track everything for Carbon County, but we can create some independent kind of statistics for each school district.
So what I'm hearing, some of these details, I guess, just will need to be worked out July when we meet and we kind of talk our way through this, looking at the state template? I mean, is that kind of what you're saying in a way?
Yeah.
And then some of the things that are in our plan, and we talked a little bit about spacing and so on. I mean, you know, that's obviously going to be an issue to enforce in a school like a kindergarten classroom or a second grade or even junior high or high school. In some ways, we can do a lot of things. But and not that you have to give suggestions tonight, but in our conversations then in our meetings, are certainly open to suggestions on how exactly spacing is going to be enforced in the kindergarten classroom or something. But, you know, maybe some of these you just do the best you can.
Yeah, we've definitely, unfortunately, even with the best plan, it's going to be the best that we could do, because you can't keep kindergartners apart from each other. Like, I have a 5-year-old, I can completely relate. Like, they don't understand social distancing, so we have to just do the best that we can in those situations. And especially with like the primary schools and the elementary schools, it's going to be plans and things that we can do, but it's not going to be perfect. We're not going to be able to keep these kids completely apart. So we just need to have practices in place that help, and to you know, educate and do different things. But like a conversation we had earlier is, you know, having bathrooms in a high school. How are you going to enforce social distancing in a restroom? You can't. All you can do is educate, put some signs on the door maybe, but there's nothing that you can really do to enforce that. That's just the reality of this. So we can create the best that we can through, you know, trying to isolate different classes. So if we have a class of 10 kindergartners that are with each other all day, those 10 are going to stay together. And then if something were to come with one of those students, we would have a smaller pool of possible risk than if a student was going back and forth between different groups. So that's kind of the idea, but I know it's not, you can't always do that, especially when you have older kids that go from class to class to class. There's different things that you have to take into account. But I think there's certain practices that we can put in place that help, but unfortunately, we're not going to be able to maintain the perfect social distancing.
And then, so the next topic that's on here is just general comments about masks. How effective are they? Should we, you know, where should we be on masks?
Sure. So I do not know what the state is going to recommend. I've honestly heard both ways. I've heard that they're going to say yes for face coverings. I've heard they've said no. Like, I really am not sure. So I'm really anxious to hear that from the state as well. Based on my understanding of COVID and our recommendations is that people still wear face coverings if they cannot maintain that distance. So I think that is a line of defense that helps reduce the risk, but it's not perfect. They've done numerous studies that say, you know, that just wearing a mask, especially a homemade or cloth mask, is not going to be 100% protect you or another individual from spreading it. What we look at is it's like a harm reduction tool. So it decreases the chance of transmission. If you have somebody that's profusely coughing and they have a face covering, that some of those droplets might get through, some of that virus might get through, but it's to help. It's going to decrease that a little bit. So I think generally, if people wear face coverings, it's going to keep the spread of the virus down a little bit, but it's not going to 100% prevent. And then just another side note, the thermometers and taking temperatures, the state did say that that's not going to be a requirement. So we're still going to recommend screening, but having actual taking temperatures is not going to be part of that screening. So what we found with COVID is not a lot of people actually, well, some people run a fever, some people don't. Sometimes it's like a subjective fever, but just taking a temperature alone is not really helpful when trying to screen somebody for COVID. So I think the masks are definitely going to be a possibility. And also another side note, the state is working with different, I believe it's different pots of PPE from like there's the strategic stockpile and FEMA, I'm not sure where else to get PPE specific for schools. So when schools do go back in session this fall, they would be given some of that PPE. What that looks like and how much, I don't know. But a lot of these students may already have a face covering if they've been out in the public at all, if they have a job somewhere. So even having them bring their own face covering might be an option. Having cloth masks that the students kind of turn in at the end of the day, and they're washed and then reissued the next morning might be an option. So there's a lot of options that we can try to find something that works for you guys as far as masks, but I definitely think it's going to be recommended. The big topic that we're kind of finding is if it's going to be recommended or required, is that I do not have an answer for you, because we're kind of fighting that with like local restaurants and a few different other things. Is at what line can you actually require somebody to wear a mask versus recommend? So some more information will be coming on that.
Okay, and you kind of touched on the next couple already, so I won't go and ask about the temperature and then the PPE supplies. Anybody else have a comment or question? Or Amanda, do you have any other things that you've seen or not seen? And I'll be glad if you want to email me any comments about this framework that we sent you a copy. That would be helpful. If you see anything that you want to email me back, make a suggestion, see something that's totally left out that you feel like should be there, those kinds of things.
Sure, and I haven't had a chance to review any of these with Dr. Couch yet, but once I do that, he might have some more comments or different things that I haven't thought of or things he would like to share. So we might be able to set up a meeting kind of offline and talk through a few more things once he gets a chance to kind of look at the plan that you guys have too.
Okay, and again, this is pretty preliminary because we know we're waiting on the state template also. We just felt like we needed to work on a little bit of something right now, so.
Yeah, and I definitely, with the things that I've read so far, there's a lot of things to consider that we don't necessarily have answers to just yet, but it's good to start these conversations and kind of think about the what ifs, so we're a little bit more prepared when that template comes out. But unfortunately, I'm really hoping to get a little bit more guidance from the state on some of these really tough decisions that we're going to have to make at the local level. But and unfortunately, we don't know what the situation is going to look like in a few months, but I'm hoping, with all of the things that we're doing now, that we can move more into like that middle tier 2 hybrid approach this fall and have start to reduce those restrictions and stuff. So I'm hoping we're on that path, but we need to be prepared if something changes and we need to go back to distance learning. So a lot of things to consider and to think about, but not a whole lot of answers at this point.
Amanda, I have a question here, and I hope I don't want to offend you here, but so how much do you weigh the risk? And for us as a school district, there's a risk in if we have to put in a lot of restrictions and people don't believe in them or don't have faith in them or don't trust the county health department or the state because they feel like there's too many restrictions. So how do you guys talk about, okay, what are the essential things that are really important to get people to do? Because if we set a lot of rules, people won't follow. Or, they'll if we place rules that aren't important, or they don't feel are important, or we can't convey that are important, then they'll start picking and choosing and just not following any rules. So the fewer guidelines we have, the more likely they are to be enforced and actually done, and actually have people have faith that they're doing it for a reason instead of just to satisfy somebody that's scared to lose their job. Do you guys talk about that kind of stuff? And for us as a school, it's the same thing. I mean, if we just enforce rules forever, people will have no faith that we're making any kind of practical decisions, and they'll pretty soon just start ignoring whatever we say. I think that's a risk for us. Any comment to that?
Sure. So, yeah, we have been placed in a very unique situation from COVID, and no matter what we share, there's going to be people that don't take us seriously, that don't take COVID seriously, and that's just the reality of this. And we've talked about that, about how do we get our message across of what we're trying to do and why we're trying to do these things. And it is challenging. I'm not saying we've been perfect at it, but we've tried our best to educate on the whys of these restrictions. But unfortunately, people are still just not going to understand. I agree that having too many restrictions, it muddies the water a little bit, and it does make it really confusing for the public to understand why, and they're less likely to follow them. So there are definitely the most important ones to follow. And we've just kind of been trying to get people to understand that COVID is here. It is throughout our whole county. There are a lot of cases that we have not been able to isolate and test. There's a lot more than we know are here. So that's the first thing is we need to basically be following universal precautions. Like, even if there's not an active case, we need to assume that their risk is still there. You know, social distancing is probably the best thing that people can do, because throughout all of this investigation, for example, if somebody tests positive for COVID, we look at when they became ill and 48 hours prior to that. And anybody that was within 6 feet without a face covering for longer than 10 minutes has risk of transmission of that virus. So if you practice social distancing, that risk is a lot less. So if the 40 hours prior to my onset, I wasn't within 6 feet of anyone, then I don't have anybody that I potentially exposed. So that is probably the number one that we've been pushing is to practice that social distancing, and not to put yourself in a situation that you could potentially be exposed, because there's a lot of people that you don't know you're going to get sick 48 hours from now. So that's why the social distancing is so important. You know, that the hand hygiene and washing your hands, the face coverings, those help as well, but it's not perfect. You know, we can't make people wear face coverings in public, even if we recommend them. Things like that, it's an individual choice, even though we try to educate as much as possible. And different things like that. I mean, it's not going to be a perfect thing, but I'd say the social distancing, washing your hands, staying home if you are sick, or if anyone in your household is sick, and staying away from people that are high risk. Those are the most important things that we've been trying to focus on to help reduce the spread throughout our community. Because those things I think are the most important, even though the other recommendations help. Those are the things that we really try to push home, trying to decrease the spread. And we know that there's going to be spread in our community. We know that it's throughout Wyoming, it's throughout Carbon County. What we're trying to do is decrease the amount of people that get sick at one time. We don't want to deplete our medical resources, and that is the ultimate goal. So we know people are going to get sick. We know that it's going to be here for the long haul. We know it's not going to go away. We're just trying to keep as many people healthy as we can throughout this.
Amanda, I had one question. So the testing, is it pretty much readily available for people, or where are we on that?
So testing is much better than it was over the last month or so. We have been able to test anybody that came in with symptoms, or we've even been able to test some asymptomatic people based on different factors. So the state continues to provide those to us. We have 6 testing sites throughout Carbon County that we provide testing supplies to. Other private labs are getting a little bit better caught up as far as providing supplies. Right now, there is a shortage on the swabs that go with this, the test, but it hasn't interfered with us just yet with us being able to provide tests. So we still are recommending anyone that is ill or has been exposed to a positive to be evaluated by a doctor and be tested. Regardless of exposure, if you've been around anybody that's been sick, if you have any of the symptoms, we recommend you be tested. So we feel pretty confident in that. And if that ever changes, then some of the other restrictions might change as well. But as long as we can adequately test and take care of the people that have COVID, I think that we will continue on this, path. But it really, there's a lot of factors that affect that. So whether the state can provide those tests is a factor, whether the private labs can provide those. And there's also certain supplies the state lab needs to run the tests. So there's a lot of factors in there, but right now we are pretty confident that we're good to test anybody that is ill.
Thank you. Anybody else have any comments, questions? Well, Amanda, thank you for giving an hour of your time here. And we really appreciate that. And like I say, after we get the state template, and probably I'm guessing, like after the 4th of July, that we'll hopefully set up some meetings and kind of refine some of these according to the template that the state gives us and so on.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you for inviting me. And if you guys have any other questions, feel free to reach out to me or to Dr. Couch, and we will definitely try to get those answered for you. I look forward to more meetings.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah,
Oh, shoot. Is Amanda still there?
no,
Yes, I'm here.
she is.
I was trying to speak, but apparently I had it on the wrong setting for you being able to hear me. But if I can, I do have a question just quick.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. Just something that boils in the back of my mind is are you look, I mean, we're looking at today, but when flu season comes around, I can kind of see things getting a little hectic with implementing, where we're at with what levels and everything. My wife's a teacher. Some days she sees a lot of her class out just from various illnesses. How are we going to, handle that? Like, I know, like if you get sick with COVID, they quarantine you for 14 days, but are we going to are we going to test everybody that's getting the flu to make sure they don't have COVID? Or are we going to require people with flu to stay out for 14 days? I mean, I can see that going south real quick. Has there been discussion about that?
There has been. We are expecting, flu to kind of complicate things. Strep really complicates things because we know that COVID likes to hang out with strep. So a lot of people are co-infected. And we didn't initially know that when we first started seeing COVID. So initially we were testing for COVID as a last resort. So if they had strep or flu or other things, we didn't test for COVID. And now we know that you can be co-infected at the same time, and it makes it further, complicates things. So as long as testing supplies are available, anyone that has flu or strep or all those other things that unfortunately don't go away when we're trying to fight COVID, they'll most likely be tested for both. So there's specific criteria that comes down from the CDC that goes to providers on how to decide who to be tested. And most likely if they have any of the symptoms, they're going to be tested for probably multiple things. So we see them tested for strep, for flu, for RSV, for COVID at the same time. And then we can kind of decide there. So when someone is ill with COVID, they have to isolate or quarantine until at least 3 days symptom free. So that usually the people that are actually sick don't have to isolate as long as the people that are exposed. Because somebody that's exposed, they have to isolate for the 14 days. But sometimes with COVID, the people that actually get it recover quicker than that. Sometimes it can take up to 6 weeks though. So it depends on the individual. We've had some that have been sick with symptoms for up to 6 weeks after diagnosis with COVID. So it really depends on that individual. And we would work through that with an individual, but the 14 days tends to be the more people are exposed, they have to isolate for the 14 days. It does make it really challenging. And we know this fall, that's when we're kind of expecting if there's gonna be a surge, is probably gonna be in the fall. But we're, gonna try to do as much as we can to help with that situation, and we're going to really push flu vaccine this fall. We're going to, push all the same things that we're doing, and some of the same prevention factors for COVID is actually going to help decrease flu and RSV and strep and all those things too, because the social distancing, all the hand sanitizing, those things are going to help with everything, but we're going to still see a lot of people sick with all those other things at the same time. So it's just going to be that extra thing that people are going to have, but it's just a little bit more serious.
So could one positive case in the school result in like going straight to the black in our tier, or, closure, or, is there a threshold?
Yeah, so it wouldn't necessarily be a case-by-case basis. So if you had one student, for example, test positive, that most likely would turn, okay, you have to look at who all was in close contact with that student. And sometimes you isolate, sometimes you just monitor. So it's not a black and white type thing. So it really depends on the situation. It may mean that you close for a few days and clean and then watch people. It may mean different things. So it really depends on the case by case. If we end up getting one and then multiple other cases connected to that one, it would be a lot more things that we have to do than just the one. So it really depends on each independent thing. So for example, in another county, there was a daycare, a student that was in a preschool that tested positive. So they ended up having to close for a few days. They sanitized, they watched the students, and no one ended up getting sick in connection to that. So everything kind of resumes back as normal, or the new normal, I guess. But if you have multiple, okay, now we have 5 students, then that changes things a little bit. So it's a case by case thing that, and I believe that is going to be part of the template or the guidance that the state sends down as well, saying if there is a positive case in your school, this is what you have to do. And most likely would probably mean closing for a day or two and sanitizing at the very least. But after that, I'm not quite sure what that would look like.
So in that case, is it your call? Is it the county health officer at that level, or like does each case go straight to the state and the state decides?
So the county health officer would be able to decide, but most likely that conversation would be taken at the state level, especially if it's the first one, or if we don't really have a procedure set yet, that would go to the state. And with all of our investigations, we work very closely with the state epidemiologists and with the state health officer. So there's always communication going back and forth. So there really hasn't been anything that got in Carbon County that we're not talking to them about. Just because we want them to know what's going on, we also need their guidance. So I foresee if that were to happen, they would help us make those decisions.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question.
Sure.
Are you going to be able to test faster than you currently are? Because now doesn't it take approximately a week to get a confirmed case back?
It ultimately depends on where you're sending the test to. If you're sending it to the state lab, sometimes we get it back that day. Sometimes it's 2 days. So it's a lot faster going through the state lab. Going through private labs such as LabCorp or Quest, sometimes it can take up to a week. But there's a lot of factors that affect how quickly a test can come back. So how many staff are in the state lab or in the private labs, how much supplies they have, how many tests they have. So sometimes we find, okay, so there's 4 or 5 different clusters going on in Wyoming. Our tests may take a little bit longer to come back, but they are definitely much faster than they were before. And they're also perfecting their practices at the labs as well, so they can get that back to us faster. They are now working on weekends, and they've hired more staff to help, so that our turnaround time is much faster than it used to be.
Well, thank you so much, Amanda.
No problem. Thank you.
Okay, well, again, thanks, Amanda, for being here and conversing with us about all these various issues that we're all still kind of trying to figure out, apparently, so.
Sure. One question for you, Jim. Is this meeting recorded so I can send it to the Dr. Couch so he can be thinking about the conversation?
Yes, it is.
Perfect. Okay.
It's on YouTube.
It's on YouTube. We have a channel. I'll get you that information.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Okay.
So it's interesting that they're from the state level and working with, they're started with that tier 1, 2, and they haven't done anything for 3 yet. So I would think you would start with in person first and work backwards.
We have a Zoom every 2 weeks with WDE, and that's where I'm getting a lot of my information about the state template. And she's right, obviously she's right, but I mean, there's various categories like safety and the various things that they have different kind of subcommittees working on. One of the things that they told the superintendents is that, you know, one of the things they're trying to grapple with, or I guess come to some decision in the template, is what are requirements and what are recommendations. So what things are going to be required of all the districts and what things are going to be recommended. And that could be based on the system on the ground, I suppose, or the conditions on the ground, as you could say, describe it maybe. So it will help us, you know, as districts to know where they draw those lines so that we can kind of proceed. I mean, I get the impression, and they basically said that they're going to try to have as few requirements, you know, as possible, so that there's flexibility and there's more recommendations and requirements. So, you know, we'll know more from when we get the template. A lot of what they say though is, you know, you will need to work with your county health department, you know, going from that point. So there'll be guidance, but you know, we'll still have work to do as far as our own county goes. So.
She mentioned that social distancing is going to be probably the last restriction left. That kind of makes our job easier on extracurricular activities. If you got to stay 6 feet apart, it's pretty hard to play basketball or football or anything. Volleyball.
I don't think that makes our job easier, but.
It makes somebody's job really hard when they have to tell somebody, well, okay, sports are out this year because we can't.
They're still
doing
going to do sports.
Do what?
They're still going to do sports.
We hope.
I think they'll still do sports.
I guess I see this board being in a unique situation. If I sound like I'm about to cry, it's because I'm in pain. But anyway, I have no air. We have the parents that are extremely restrictive, and we have parents, like James said, that are, you know, extremely the other way. What affects us as this board is, do we have people completely pull out of our district and say, if we're going to have to deal with this, we'll homeschool? And we have a lot of homeschoolers already, so I hope that's not something that we see, you know, happen to this district or any other school districts. But I think this kind of board has a more unique situation than like a county commission or, you know, the legislators, because we're going to see this really strong battle between the two wills, you know, of people wanting to follow these requirements and not. And it affects our bottom line, frankly, you know.
Yeah, that's been a topic at the superintendent meetings that we have every week, is how is this gonna affect enrollment and so on, and a lot of it will depend on how it's designed, you know.
Yeah.
Families, I think that's why, you know, I think that we will have activities in some form. I mean, I don't know how exactly it's gonna look. I hope it's as normal as we can have it, but again, you know, if the 6 foot is enforced, that will affect team sports for sure. And affect a lot of individual sports. I mean, wrestling's individual, but yet, you know, team and individual. Cross country, I mean, you're gonna be passing people. So I don't know, it's just gonna be interesting, where everything goes.
You guys, the principals, I mean, you guys want to take a few minutes and give us your take or thoughts? I'd love to hear your thoughts. You saw it on my video.
At the principals conference just last week, I mean, everybody across the state has the same concerns. One of the concerns, and I don't think it was really answered by Jillian Balo, but one of the concerns and thoughts from some of the districts across the state was, could districts perhaps create their own, and there are a couple that are exploring this, creating their own virtual academy type thing. If you have students that are don't want to send, parents and students who don't want to send their kids, but don't want to necessarily do homeschool, or don't want to go to the only other option, which is send them to one of the other virtual schools. So they're looking at whether the rules could be relaxed for the funding on that. They don't know that yet from the state level, but they're looking into that on whether schools could, if districts could offer that at their own level.
What superintendents are hearing about that same topic is that's why they're wanting to call this hybrid.
Yeah.
They're not wanting nor expecting schools to go through all the rules to establish a virtual campus within the district, but a hybrid approach could be a combination and yet still fall within the funding, because they're still your student and you're still providing the teaching in some hybrid form. And the term hybrid has been used by Superintendent Balo a lot and by others, as how that's exactly going to look remains to be seen. But I do think, you know, we're going to need to be prepared to offer some type of options for students that have maybe underlying health conditions or whatever. They still want to have connection to the district and have, you know, even some face-to-face time in some situations. And so, you know, how exactly all this is going to look, I think that's what we're all trying to figure out, is how it's actually going to look and how it can be practical. You know, we mentioned in the past about you can't really expect a second grade teacher to teach the kids in class and then also be responsible for 3 or 4 that are at home. The time involved in all of that. So, you know, there are some ways to provide, you know, recording lessons or, you know, live lessons, that sort of thing. But obviously there's going to have to be some support, technologically speaking, or technically speaking, and also just the time involved in the connection between the student that's at home and the school. There's going to have to be somebody that's kind of responsible for keeping that connection, probably in addition to just saying that, you know, Mrs. Smith, it's all on you to figure all this out. You teach the ones that come and then you're responsible for, you can't, that's not a very practical approach for your staff, really. So yeah, a lot of unanswered questions, but as far as what Stephen's talking about, I do think they're trying to allow school districts to provide these hybrid designs without having to face all the, you know, getting a campus approved, like a virtual campus approved, like the 2 in 1 have been. So Yeah, interesting times ahead, I'm sure.
Aaron, Mike,
You know, I think the same thing. I think that as a school, I think we're gonna have to look at, you know, just changing the way that we do things, whether that is, you know, recording all of your reading and math lessons on Zoom for the 1 or 2 students that are at home. You know, having a school that has multiple sections in each grade, you might have to change the case load for a couple of the teachers and have one of the teachers be the homeschool or the alternate learning teacher. That, you know, that's an idea, but I do think we're gonna have to do a few things different, or else we are gonna lose some kids. You know, I think parents, for the most part, came to me and said, man, we don't want to do this again next year. We're sending our kids regardless, and that's, you know, that's a good feeling that they appreciate what we're doing, but I think we're gonna have to change a little bit in order to reach all of the kids that we currently reach.
I haven't heard from any parents that are reluctant to send kids back. Anyone who's approached me and talked to me has said, we're ready to send our kids back. And, you know, yeah, it won't be exactly the same. We wouldn't want to do it that way anyway. We'll have to make adjustments. But I haven't heard anybody that's, you know, considering not sending their kids because of it.
You know, in the social distancing and the use of masks, that's tough. That doesn't work very well in an elementary school, you know, even 4th graders. And so I sure hope we don't go to that requirement, which I guess we're gonna have to do it the best we can, but it is really difficult. We did some kindergarten stuff, releasing the butterflies and taking pictures with their little graduation caps on. Kids don't get it, you know, they don't understand what's going on with that. So we can do the best that we can. We can disinfect our schools. You know, custodial wise, we're really gonna have to beef up, you know, what we do, and things are gonna look a little bit different, but we're gonna make it work, so.
And the attendance awards are going right out the window,
Yeah.
which really don't hurt my feelings at all.
You know, with one thing that Amanda brought up that really kind of worries me a little bit is if we got these attorneys out there, they're just waiting for somebody to open their school for their kid to go in and get sick. And then to come after us with litigation. That's scary, but you know, what would happen if we threw open the doors and say, enter at your own risk?
Sign the waiver.
Sign the waiver, here we go. We gotta open something back up eventually, or this thing is gonna go on until nothing is left.
And she, you know, she talked about balance, that, you know, they certainly didn't seem to put a lot of weight on the social, emotional, exercise, diets, other things, like no weight to it. I mean, COVID's it and everything else doesn't matter. And that's not reality. So at least in my opinion of reality.
So what happens with the waiver if students and staff had to sign a waiver? How much slack do you think the district would get from that? I think it's worth the risk because one litigation.
I think it's gonna depend. I mean, most liability depends on, you know, good faith efforts. Are you trying to have a plan, or are you being as careful as everybody's approved, you know, you to be? So, I mean, I do think those would be factors. If we just acted like we didn't care about the recommendations, we didn't really have a plan, we're just gonna open the doors, then I think you'd be more liable than if you try to have some kind of approved plan. But I mean, there's no guarantee, you know, that you're not liable. I mean, to be real honest.
You know, it follows the same guidelines as the COVID. If you let it get a hold of you, you've got to have a mask. It's like the waiver. It's a waiver is just a mask for the district, basically. So
One of the things I thought was interesting, because we built our tiered plan on even separating kind of our communities. So in other words, if there was a problem in Hannah, we wouldn't necessarily treat in Cameron and Saratoga the same way that we would treat the Hannah campuses. But yet, if they're going to look at this as a countywide thing, which I want to explore and expand a little bit when we start to meet in July, what happens in Rollins is very different than what happens in our district, or could be, and this, I guess vice versa also. But that concerns me a little bit, to be honest.
So I think that one of the main reasons I want to have this meeting in June, the work session to start, is if there's things we don't agree on with them, what are our options to push back? And if it's coming all from the state, maybe we have very little. If it's by the county, you know, and talking with Bill, you know, there may be things that, you know, the people that elected and talk to the people on this board would want us to push back against as far as restrictions. And what, if we have some flexibility, then that's a good example. You know, looking at a county case versus encampment versus Hannah versus Saratoga. Yeah, there's a little overlap, but no more than there would be in here to Albany County, you know, so. And if there's issues in Saratoga and you have to be locked down, do I have the freedom, I'll send my kids to encampment before I make them wear a mask.
She did back off a little bit and said we could share some information and so on,
Right.
but to be honest, if they're gonna look at this as a countywide thing, we might as well just be in all the meetings with Carbon One and just have the same
Yeah.
plan, because it depends on where they're gonna come down on that, but one of my questions was gonna be, are you, right now, of course, they're not sharing locations and all, and I'm not asking for who or anything, I just, would you let us know if it's in a community, because then that might put us in a different level, tier, or whatever. But again, we've got to explore a little bit of that, I think in July with them, to see exactly what their approach is going to be. Not a lot of solid answers, I mean, I guess they.
Which we didn't expect, it's too far out. We probably don't want solid answers at this point either, to be held to.
So I'm sure you guys, or some of you maybe, I hadn't read it exactly, but the sixth continuation modification from the statewide public health, K-12 schools, colleges, universities, trade schools. Groups shall be limited to 50 people, students and teachers. The facility shall restrict groups of people to 50 in each separate room. The facility may allow more than 50 in the facility only if each group of 50 is in a room separated by walls from other groups. Spacing of at least 6 feet between people must be maintained whenever possible. Face coverings shall be worn in situations where 6 feet of separation cannot be maintained. 6 foot of spacing between students during transportation to and from the facility must be maintained as much as practicable, and hand hygiene must be performed frequently within the facility.
They're
Yeah, that
putting
was
a lot of
last-
leeway in it.
That was last Wednesday, and he does these orders every 2 weeks normally. I mean, that's been the past.
So I mean,
practice.
that's less restrictive than what she was saying.
Well, one of the things though, you know, what does that practicable mean, really? Because if you have 50, if you're allowed 50 in a room, but they need to be 6 feet apart, then that's gonna limit less than 50 in most of our classrooms. I mean, unless you talk about gyms or big spaces. So if you try to put all of it together, you know, if your room is big enough, I guess you could have 50 in there. But none of our rooms are gonna be big enough unless we do away with spacing, which she indicated was one of the strongest things.
And are we gonna have to like change bill schedules and stuff?
Well, we've talked about things that, you know, one of the things that, and, you know, we're not gonna obviously want time to go through this whole plan, but some of the things we talked about or threw out there was like, if we get into more restricted tiers, rather than kids move, teachers move in secondary ranks. Now that you're limited with, again, it came up, what about ag? You can't move a shop. I mean, there's gonna be different, and they're not all in the same class. I mean, they don't stay in the same group as they move from class to class. So
That
there's
works good, maybe elementary.
a lot of limitation. In secondary, that's gonna be more of an issue than elementary, but then elementary is gonna have some issues with secondaries too. So, I was glad to hear her say you do the best you can. If they realize that there's no way to guarantee 6 feet of spacing, for example, in an elementary, or really, or any school, let's be honest. We've talked about restrooms, how that's gonna look. You know, we're gonna develop, obviously, details on these tiers, but we just didn't want to spend days on it, and then we don't even have the state template yet. So we just wanted to start with a framework, get some of her comments, talk a little bit about it amongst ourselves, and realize that in July, we're gonna have some continued work to do as an admin team, and then as a board. You know, really, we may have to have a special, I don't know. We'll just have to-
Are they backing up that state template to see what happens over the summer? Is that why it's coming out so late?
You know, that's kind of interesting. I have a theory, but it may not be a right theory, but I just think people are wanting to wait to see what happens in the real world. And I also think that nobody really wants to say, here's your plan. They want it to be flexible. They want to allow, so nobody wants to be the bad guy, which is always the case, of course. So they're kind of putting, just like WASA, they won't come out with, I mean, they could easily say no out-of-state competitions this next year, but they won't do that. If they leave it up to each county, it's going to be interesting to see how that develops, things like that, because Uena County's already been told by their county health officer, no games in Utah, which they play a lot of over there because they're closer to Utah than a lot of the Wyoming schools. So, schedules can't be, well, I guess they can be changed overnight, but I mean, that's going to be a real challenge if we can't nail down anything about where we're going and what we're doing. That's why I asked the question. Ron Laird said, your county health officer, you work with your county health department, and then they may allow you to go some places, but not others, depending on the situation, even where you're going. Well, our first 2 football games in Saratoga on our schedule, Fremont County, and the reservations. Well, something tells me that's kind of unlikely if you're deciding that today. So I'm just saying, that's going to be a real challenge, is to figure out how the heck, and then plus, that's if you get past the transportation. You take a team, or in some of our cases, we take junior high school together, depending on our school, or those kind of things. Well, it can take a lot of buses if you have 8 kids on the bus.
If you can have a practice, how can you not get on the bus together? You're on the locker room together.
Right now, and we just posted on the website today our open gym rules. So if you haven't seen those as a parent, they're on there, and we're trying to get all those forms out. And we specifically tried to just stay within that governor's order, so we didn't have to ask for variances. So Amanda Brown told us, yeah, if you stay within that order, it was the one, this latest one, then you don't have to ask us. So we specifically stayed within those guidelines, so we didn't have to ask them to get approval and all that. So they measured the weight rooms, for example. They figured out how many kids could be in one for 120 square feet. They made sure stations were 6 feet apart, or if not, it's every other station. So that limits your numbers. They're setting a schedule. So a lot of things look different.
I think it's going to be really hard if you start getting positive cases. Keep the school open. I had to, because I had a sinus infection. Now they test you for anything if you have any, like I can smell that sinus infection. It took a week, and that was last week I had to do it. It took a week to get the report, and I had to call 4 or 5 times. They wouldn't let me go to the doctor until I had the result. So if you think you have a kid in school, what are you going to have to do with that kid in school? Are they going to have to wait that week out of school to find out if they have it? Then we wait however long it is until they're done. That could be 3 weeks. That could be 8 weeks. So you have to have a backup plan for what you're going to do with those kids if they do get sick. And then if you have all those kids, if you make all those kids get tested and they don't have it, then they're out of school for a week. Then they could get sick down the road and have to be tested. If you have to be tested every time you have the flu and get tested for it and wait for the results and not attend school, that's going to.
Well, and that's not to mention, the whole staff side of things, which is a whole nother world. And I know Sally's been to a workshop too. That whole discussion's been some legal things about what can be required, so that's going to be another challenge.
I honestly think the staff's going to be a big challenge for us.
When they're getting tough.
When Jillian Balo was talking to us last week for the principals thing, we really tried to push her on this plan thing. And she didn't give us a lot of details, but she said that the big thing on the plan was for it to be flexible for each district. So the start of the school year would probably look different in Fremont County versus, say, Carbon County or Platte County, where we really haven't had very many cases. One of the big parts of the plan that she stressed, though, was the ability to pivot very quickly to, if we have to close, like this year we had the kind of the 3-week grace period or whatever, where we were able to plan and try to make everything as best as possible, where we didn't have to do anything for a while, but then we had to make our adaptive learning plans, and then we had to do our online instruction. She said there is no grace period from here on out, and you would just have to be able to pivot right away.
So
if
like
you
if
have to
this,
close.
so like if a student had to be home, you need to have a way immediately you can start to provide that
Yeah.
home instruction.
So that was one of the things that she stressed, that as soon as you got closed, you are able to pivot and go to online instruction right away without that time to prepare, because we have this time to prepare now. So you have to just pivot and go.
Well, and we have a framework now in
Yeah.
place, you know, since we've used it, with how effective it is with some kids is more than others. Depends on a whole lot of various situations, but I suggested that if we had students that, you know, were sick or had to be at home or they had underlying health, that you could still count them, just put them as homebound students, but then provide that hybrid, you know, connection, because they're still a student if they're just classified as homebound. And nobody said that that was not probably a good option, you know, from the state levels at this point. So I think some districts are considering that. I think they'll give us flexibility to do a hybrid approach, you know, just to be ready to go back and forth.
And I think it'd be nice if you had a facilitator or something, so it was more streamlined, having 4 different kids in 4 different grades. The communication style of every teacher, I had stuff all over the place, and I know they did a fantastic job, but it was hard for me to keep track of where I was getting what information and that type of stuff. If you had one central, you know, like they all come from this, or you all use Canvas or whatever they use, that type of thing as your format for it would make it more streamlined and make it more adaptable to bounce in and out of.
Well, obviously you learn things when you do something on the fly like that. And so we have learned some things that I think we would probably do a little different. But one of the things that, I mean, I just threw out and talked to Sally about it, and I think I can't remember who all I've mentioned to, is just having somebody that's kind of a coordinator. You know, Nanette is already into a lot of technology and instruction facilitator. Maybe we could have somebody that could be her partner, where they could be the liaison between the teacher and the student and keep that connection and going, and yet even still provide some instruction somewhat if they're a certified teacher. So we are toying around with some things and some ideas. And
So Sally, have they said anything about, like, 'cause I know you said, touch on it a little bit, but like liability insurance, like if we do reopen now? Because I know that's been a huge issue with, like, say, a lot of the rodeos that they've canceled, or, you know, stuff like that, because their insurance won't cover them if they have the event, you know? So, I mean, I know school is a little bit different, but is there an issue?
No, CERF's, with the school risk and retention program of the state, which is school districts, area 26 of us, I think, are members of that. So as far as the liability insurance, they're fully aware of that. I just received today some information from our health insurance, talking about what's covered under our health policies as far as COVID testing and related illnesses and that sort of thing. So everyone, and of course, Wyoming Employee Benefit Trust, it has school, about the same number of school districts, about 26 plus cities and counties in WEC. And so they're fully aware of like the testing and the health issues and that sort of thing. They're, you know, it's nationwide. They're looking at how health coverage is going to work. But as far as liability and so forth, you know, you're talking about the waivers, that would be a bill question. But Tracy Copenhagen has weighed in on CERF, because CERF is a school board's group. And so our premiums have gone up this year about 28%, I think, is what our liability and everything. But we're on the low side. There are some districts, because of hail damage, that their premiums are going up over 100%. They're doubling. But ours has just gone up 28% because we haven't had any claims as far as property and that sort of thing. But that's the big thing. But as far as the COVID things, there's going to be certain protections of being a government entity and a public school. Tracy Copenhagen would tell you that there are certain protections that are implicit in being a public entity. Does that help?
Mm-hmm.
No, but those are probably, you know, obviously predicated on following restrictions.
Yeah, following the rules.
State plans.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
And the county that can fund Really big, I mean,
Yeah, that's a great concern, if that is asking expressed that.
Okay, any other comments, questions, concerns? I mean, we have Bill submitting, but I need to go.
This is just really helpful. I'm learning a lot of new information and thinking about a lot of different things. I think this, because this is so unprecedented, would it be worthwhile for us to have another workshop or meeting where we can just talk about this, even though maybe it's not quite as long? But I think we're gonna be fielding a lot of questions, or at least trying to help people understand where we're coming from, and why these decisions are being made, that I'd really like to be kept in the loop.
I think after we get the state template, which again is promised around the first week of July, maybe after the 4th, consider possibly a session.
Jim and I talked about that before this one even, is that we may have to have work sessions in July and in August. I think it's probably pretty safe to assume we'll probably have to have one in August, but I hate to have meetings, every school board meeting be super long, but I think, honestly, the most important thing is opening school with the fewest restrictions possible. But I don't know if this helps get us there, but.
What if we was to have a July, once we see what the stage.
Toward the end of July, maybe.
Yeah, and then again in August, but, what if we was to invite the town, invite the parents, try to give them an idea of what we're planning on doing.
And in July, potentially too, if it's shorter, it could be, like a presentation portion in the regular board meeting. It might not have to be a special work session. I think so. Obviously, people have a lot of input at all.
Our meeting in July is pretty early. I think the first is on a Wednesday. Wednesday. So it's the 15th. So I'm just not sure we would be having enough time between when we get the state template and to kind of come up with a coherent suggestion for discussion and meet with county health to kind of get their input on what they're going to approve. So I would say toward the end of July, possibly, or the 1st of August, but it's kind of scary to wait that long, but I mean, we've got to know what we don't know right now.
Yeah, and again, one of the things to go earlier is that if there's anything that we don't agree with that we want to push back on, but if you don't have the plans, then it's hard, same thing, you can't push back, or like a separate, treating our schools separate than the community, or than the county level.
Because I don't think they're doing that in Fremont County, doing all of Fremont County, because that would really, there's a lot of other schools that have nothing but a really hot zone that would be tough to do. You can do it on a community basis.
I don't know how, and I don't think you could figure out if they just gave you a number. Saratoga has 2 people, and Cameron has 1. People are gonna go door to door and be like, who's sick?
The ones that are going to know, and it's going to be told maybe anyway. If it's like most information or secrets around here.
Everybody
How
knows
accurate
anyway.
now is another thing, but I would think it would be okay. I was hoping that they would say, at least we can tell you it's in your community, that puts you in tier yellow or whatever. And that's what I would like, but it doesn't sound like that's what they're thinking at least today. So that's why that caught me a little by surprise if they're looking. But we'll see. We'll see as we meet with them after we get that template.
So is there any talk, as we get back in school and actually have students, and we probably, some of us don't even know this very well ourselves, what COVID actually is, what the risk level actually is, what it actually causes, what are the long-term, negative things. I'm sure we've all looked at that, but.
Jim, you probably know better than anybody from your sons, but.
Well, there's a lot of misinformation.
Some of the long-term, they don't really know, and why it affects some and not others. Obviously, underlying health conditions, but there have been some healthy individuals that come in and either die from it or get very ill from it. So just a lot of unknowns, and that's why everybody doesn't know really what to do necessarily is the best way forward. But it's, they kind of leveled off in the county where my son works in the ER, and then now they've kind of had an increase. They had like 20-some cases in one day, 2 days in a row now. So they don't know. Of course, Texas supposedly is having a little bit of an uptick right now, along with other states. So, yeah, I don't know.
The recovery rate's really good here and the non-hospitalization rate's really high.
And
I mean,
the
very few.
mortality rate has to be really good.
It is.
Very
really
low is what I'm saying.
Yeah, so I don't know. My biggest fear is when we get all of our kids back together, there's all the other stuff that they catch every year. And really now having them apart, 6, 8 months?
Yeah, that's what Mike was saying on some of his questions.
Yeah,
What
it's
about
gonna
just
hit
regular
big
flu
time.
and all the other things that ever goes around?
Yeah, and if you have one of those warning signs of it, they'll make you get tested.
Yeah.
So
I
then
know, that's the
that,
thing,
so
that's
you
what
won't
doesn't even
know.
make sense to me. I mean,
It's-
we're gonna have a ton of sick kids, just
And
having
One
them
thing my
apart.
son said that they ran into an issue there where there was a complaint by somebody that was connected to some high-ups in the hospital about taking too long to get the results back. It was, I forget, like the next day, I can't remember. It was pretty quick. It was quicker than what you were talking about. But then it's a test that you can get it back within an hour, but it's only half as accurate. I mean, so they made the whole ER start using that quick test just because of the pressure, the political pressure they got. And so my son was a little frustrated that, how much can you really count on the results?
Well, and that's the thing. So when my niece had to take the test, like in March, she had really high fever for a while. And it took almost a week and a half, I think, to get the results back. But they told us then, and she had to be quarantined and had to do all this. When I got tested, they said I didn't have to. So it's not the same standard either. They didn't tell me to stay home. They didn't tell me anything. But when she got tested, they said that it's mutated so rapidly that that's why it keeps taking longer and longer for them to figure it out, is because it keeps mutating, so you'll get false negatives and they'll have to retest it out. So I don't know.
Well, we'll just get the template, hopefully around the 1st of July or the first week, and then we'll probably right after that, try to meet with whoever's available to meet in July on the admin team, and then start meeting with the health department to see what they're thinking.
I guess a lot of the restrictions don't bother me, but the masks do. Just because there's been enough stuff come out, research to say these cloth masks don't do much. Doctors, nurses, whatever. And so it worries me with kids, and I know my son.
If they're surgical level mask, I think they're somewhat effective, but they're not available, so everybody.
Yeah, we're not gonna have every kid with that. And then I know my kids, my son can't even stand to have clothes on, so a mask on his face, no, it's not gonna work well. He's gonna be messing with it constantly, so that's an issue for me. The rest of it, I can get by with, but that is not one of them.
I think as we work these things out, we need to get input from the staff also.
Yeah, I just feel like we have to wait at least till we see what are requirements and what are recommendations, and then work together and like you say, get input, and then hopefully get some information out to the community and see what questions they have or comments.
And with the spikes in other states, I can see Wyoming really just kind of holding tight.
You should see all the out-of-state plates downtown. I think they brought it to us.
I think, yeah. Well,
They all came here.
And, to keep it into perspective, the spacing on the buses, you're actually more likely to die from being on the road in the bus than you are from COVID in Wyoming. So, we don't want to lose perspective on risk, and that actually riding in the bus is actually more dangerous than having COVID so far. And we've had restrictions and everything else, I understand that, but
In this state,
in this state of Wyoming. So, and people being on their cars, bringing their kids to school, as opposed to being on a public bus, is probably even risky. So, some of the things you say, we can make these rules to try to avoid spacing, but we actually put the kids at more risk potentially. So having a little common sense will help, I think, when we actually come to rules. Yeah.
Common sense is good. I like that.
Okay, Mike. All right, thank you guys. Thanks, Dr. Copeland, for putting that together. I'll go ahead and adjourn this work session.